Hi, I'm Isabella Cross. I used to believe family was supposed to be the safest place in the world. I thought it meant comfort, loyalty, and love that didn't need to be earned. For most of my life, I held on to that belief like it was the last warm blanket on a freezing night, but I learned the hard way that blood doesn't always mean protection, and sometimes, the people who should stand up for you are the ones who will sharpen the knives. My story begins in a home where smiles were currency, and I always seemed to have the smallest share. From the outside, our family looked perfect. We had a nice suburban house, 2 cars in the driveway, and the kind of polished holiday cards you'd expect from people who seemed to have it all together. My parents, Daniel and Margaret Cross, were respected in our community. They dressed well, spoke well, and loved to host parties. And then there was Amelia, my sister, 2 years older, with perfect hair and perfect grades. She was the golden child, the one everyone adored. And me. I was the shadow she cast without even trying. I can't remember a time when I wasn't compared to her. When I brought home a B, Amelia had an A+. When I played piano, she played violin better. Even when I achieved something worth celebrating, my parents found a way to redirect the spotlight back to her. "That's nice, Isabella," my mother would say, before turning to Amelia and asking about her next big performance or competition. It wasn't just favoritism, was a quiet erasure. A way of telling me I would never be enough, no matter how hard I tried. My grandfather, Edward Cross, was the only one who saw me differently. He wasn't a loud man, but when he spoke, you listened. He'd call me Bright Eyes and tell me I had a way of noticing things most people missed. When my parents were too busy praising Amelia, he'd slip me a knowing smile, a wink, or a small gift that felt like a reminder. You matter. He was the anchor in a sea that always seemed to push me away. Without him, I'm not sure I would have believed in myself at all. When I was 16, my grandfather's health started to decline. He moved into a small guest room at our house, so my parents could take care of him. The truth, I was the one who spent most evenings by his side, bringing him tea, reading to him, and listening to his stories. Amelia rarely visited. She said she was too busy, though I suspect the quiet conversations of an old man bored her. I didn't mind. In those moments, I felt seen. He'd tell me about his days building his business, the sacrifices he made, and the importance of protecting what's yours. As the years passed, my connection to him deepened. He'd ask me about my dreams, my fears, and the kind of life I wanted. I told him I wanted independence, freedom from constantly being measured against someone else's perfection. He'd nod and say, "One day, you'll have it. But you'll have to fight for it." I didn't understand then just how right he was. Looking back, those words feel like a warning I didn't recognize soon enough, but in that moment, it felt like encouragement. A rare spark of hope in a house where I was never the favorite. When my grandfather passed away, I was 24. The grief was heavy, not just because I'd lost him, but because I knew I'd lost the only true advocate I had in our family. My parents acted appropriately devastated in public, hosting a flawless memorial service. Amelia cried softly, the kind of staged, delicate tears that earned her sympathetic pats on the back. I didn't have to perform. My tears were real. They came from a place of love, not image. I stayed behind after the service, sitting by his framed photograph, wondering how I'd survive without his quiet strength to lean on. A week later, the family lawyer reached out. My grandfather had left a will, and we were to meet privately to hear its contents. I walked into that lawyer's office with no expectations. I assumed there might be a few keepsakes, a watch, maybe some of his old books. I never imagined that his legacy was far bigger, far more life-changing. My parents and Amelia were already seated when I arrived, their faces unreadable. The lawyer gestured for me to sit, then opened a thick folder. That's when I felt the first ripple of something strange, something I couldn't yet name. The lawyer read his words in a steady voice. My grandfather had left his entire estate, valued at over $10 million, solely to me, not to be split, not to be shared. Mine. The words didn't sink in at first. My parents sat frozen, their faces tightening as the meaning settled. Amelia's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes flicking between me and the lawyer. My heart pounded, not from greed, but from the shock of it all. He'd trusted me with everything. It felt overwhelming, a responsibility I hadn't seen coming. In that moment, I thought they'd respect his wishes. I should have known better. The meeting ended with stiff handshakes and my parents' forced smiles. "This is Unexpected, my mother said. We'll talk later. There was no congratulations, no pride, just tension so thick it felt like the air itself was pressing down on me. I tried to tell myself it was just surprise, that they'd come around, but deep inside, a small, sharp voice whispered that this was the start of something dangerous. Something that would unravel whatever fragile peace existed in our family. I left the office uneasy, clutching the folder like it was both a gift and a target. Over the next few days, I tried to reach out to my parents. I wanted to discuss plans, to see how I could use the inheritance in ways that might benefit all of us. They avoided my calls. Amelia posted pictures online of shopping sprees and dinners out, as if nothing had happened. My gut told me they were already plotting, that the silence wasn't harmless, it was strategic. I remembered my grandfather's warning, "You'll have to fight for it." Back then, I thought he meant the world outside our home. I never imagined the real fight would be with them. I began to notice subtle changes in how they treated me. My mother's tone was clipped, my father's patience thinner than usual. Conversations turned icy within seconds. If Amelia entered the room, their expressions softened, their voices warmed. I was being shut out, quietly but unmistakably. The inheritance hung between us like a loaded gun, one I wasn't yet ready to point. I still believed we could talk things through, still clung to the fantasy that they'd honor his wishes. I didn't understand that I was already standing on the edge of the betrayal that would change everything. Even in that uneasy space, I told myself not to worry. I had the law on my side. The will was clear. My grandfather's trust in me was documented, signed, and sealed. They couldn't take it away, not without crossing legal lines. I didn't yet realize that laws can be bent, twisted, and reshaped when the people breaking them have enough motivation. I was still the girl who wanted to believe the best in her family. I didn't see that their silence wasn't grief, it was calculation. And by the time I did, it would already be too late to stop them. That was the last moment I remember feeling safe in my own home. Before the lies. Before the signatures I never gave. Before the night they looked me in the eyes and told me I didn't belong. Before I learned that family doesn't always stab you in the back sometimes. They smile while they do it, and in that smile, I would come to understand just how dangerous love can be when it's poisoned by greed. 2 weeks after the will reading, my parents finally called me into the living room. The air felt heavier than usual, thick with something I couldn't quite name. Amelia sat on the couch in silk pajamas, sipping coffee like she was in her own kingdom. My father stood near the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, while my mother perched on the edge of her chair, posture rigid. "We've been thinking," she began, her voice sugar-sweet but hollow. That's when I knew this wasn't a conversation. This was an ambush. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to sit down, bracing for whatever came next. They didn't waste time softening the blow. My father's voice was clipped, businesslike, as he explained they had restructured the estate. They believed it was in the family's best interest for the money to go to Amelia. He spoke as though he were reading from a press release, not dismantling my future. My mother nodded along, her eyes sharp, watching my every reaction. Amelia said nothing, but the faintest smirk tugged at her lips. My mind reeled. This wasn't just favoritism. This was theft, calculated and deliberate. My grandfather's last wish had been erased like it never existed. I asked how they could possibly justify this. My father said I was too young and too inexperienced to handle such wealth responsibly. My mother chimed in with a condescending smile, adding that Amelia had more ambition and a clear vision for the future. I felt my jaw tighten, the insult cutting deeper than the loss itself. "This isn't yours to give away," I said quietly. My father's eyes hardened. "It's ours to protect," he replied. The room felt colder. The way they looked at MIT wasn't love anymore. It was ownership, and they had just decided I wasn't worth keeping. When I demanded the legal explanation, they revealed they'd found a loophole. My grandfather's estate had been placed in a trust, and as executors, they'd reallocated the assets under the guise of family preservation. It was all perfectly legal, at least on paper. My stomach turned as I realized how fast they must have acted. They hadn't even waited for the grief to settle before tearing apart his wishes. Amelia finally spoke, her voice dripping with false concern. "It's better this way, Bella. You don't want the stress." My fingers clenched against my knees, nails digging into my skin to keep from exploding. I told them I would fight it, that I would hire my own lawyer. My father's expression turned to stone. "You'll regret it if you do," he said in a voice that carried no hint of affection. My mother added, "Don't embarrass us, Isabella." Those words hit like a slap, not because of their cruelty, but because it confirmed what I'd always known. Image mattered more than I ever would. Amelia watched silently, her smirk now unhidden. I realized then that this wasn't a discussion at all. It was a decision already made, and my presence there was just a formality. The conversation ended abruptly. When my father told me I could either accept this and remain part of the family or walk away, my chest burned, fury mixing with disbelief. I stood, my voice trembling but steady enough to say, "I'll walk." My mother's eyes narrowed, as if I'd failed some unspoken test. Amelia didn't even look up as I left the room. My hands were shaking, my thoughts tangled, but one thing was clear: I wasn't staying where I wasn't wanted. Still, I didn't yet understand just how final their choice would be. That knowledge came hours later, in the ugliest way possible. I had barely made it to my bedroom when my father appeared in the doorway, his shadow stretching across the floor. "Pack your things," he said flatly. At first, I thought I'd misheard. "Now," he repeated, his tone sharper. My heart pounded as I tried to process the speed of it all. They weren't just cutting me out financially, they were throwing me out of my own home. My mother appeared behind him, holding a trash bag. Amelia leaned against the hallway wall, arms crossed, watching like it was a show she'd been waiting for. I grabbed my suitcase, my breath uneven, rage simmering under my skin. When I stepped into the hallway, my father took my arm, steering me toward the front door. "We'll send the rest of your things," my mother said, as if she were doing me a favor. Amelia tilted her head, her smirk widening. "Good luck out there," she said softly, mock sympathy coating her words. The weight of their betrayal pressed down on me, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. My father opened the door, and the cold night air hit my face like a slap. Every step I took outside felt like a tear in my chest. The final insult came when my father tossed my small suitcase onto the porch and shut the door behind me without another word. I stood there, frozen, the reality sinking in. Neighbors' curtains shifted as they peeked out, curious about the scene. My cheeks burned with humiliation. Amelia's laughter rang faintly through the door before it clicked shut. I wanted to scream, to pound on the wood until it splintered. Instead, I stood in the dark, my breath clouding in the cold air, clutching the handle of my suitcase. The life I had known was gone, stolen not just in money but in belonging. I walked down the driveway, each step echoing in the silence of the neighborhood. The houses around me were lit warmly, families inside laughing or watching TV. It struck me that I no longer had that, not with them, not anywhere. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Amelia. "Don't take it personally." The audacity made my stomach churn. It wasn't personal. They had taken my inheritance, my home, my family, and left me on the curb like trash. If that wasn't personal, I didn't know what was. I deleted the message without replying, my hands trembling from cold and fury. That night, I stayed at a cheap motel on the edge of town. The room smelled faintly of bleach and stale cigarettes, but it was warm, and the door locked from the inside. I sat on the bed with the suitcase at my feet, staring at the peeling wallpaper. My grandfather's voice echoed in my mind, "You'll have to fight for it." I'd always thought that meant life's obstacles, not my own family. But now I knew better. They had made their move, swift and cruel. And while I didn't yet know how, I swore to myself that I would make mine. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Amelia's smirk, my father's cold stare, my mother's dismissive nod. The images replayed like a reel I couldn't stop, each frame feeding the fire in my chest. By morning, the grief had hardened into something sharper resolve. They thought they'd ended my story that night, thrown me into the shadows to disappear, quietly. But they'd made a mistake. They'd underestimated me. And if there was one thing my grandfather had taught me, it was that you never leave your fate in someone else's hands, not if you want to keep it. I checked out of the motel with no clear plan, but a fierce determination buzzing under my skin. The sky was gray, a thin drizzle dampening the streets. It didn't matter. I knew this wasn't the end, it was the beginning. My parents had stolen what was rightfully mine, and Amelia had played her role with smug satisfaction. But they hadn't destroyed me, they'd forged me. And one day soon, they would realize the cost of what they'd done, not in money, but in the kind of revenge you never see coming until it's too late to stop it. I had always believed that revenge was for people who couldn't move on. But when your own parents rip your life apart, you stop caring about noble ideas. I couldn't confront them openly, they had too much control, too many people believing their lies. So I decided my revenge wouldn't be loud at first. It would be quiet, invisible, and patient. I started by studying every legal document related to my inheritance. Old wills, trust funds, hidden clauses. I read them until my eyes burned. I wasn't looking for what they wanted me to see. I was hunting for what they didn't think I'd ever find. The more I read, the more cracks I found. My father's arrogance left gaps, and my mother's greed made her careless. They thought transferring the money to my sister made them untouchable. But the trust had a clause. If the funds were mishandled, they reverted to the original heir, me. They didn't read it, but I did. All I had to do was prove misuse, and that meant watching, listening, waiting for them to slip up. I would make my revenge look like justice. So no one could stop me. I started showing up at family events again, pretending to make peace. I smiled through gritted teeth, hugged my sister as if she hadn't just stolen my life, and let my parents think I'd accepted their betrayal. They relaxed around me, speaking too freely. I learned about their spending sprees, the unnecessary property purchases, and the investment in my sister's failing business. Every slip of their tongue was another weapon in my arsenal. I was building a case without them even realizing I was the one pulling the strings. Outside of family gatherings, I began making allies. I contacted an old friend of my father's, a lawyer he had once betrayed. The man hated my father enough to help me for free. He guided me on how to quietly gather evidence without raising suspicion. Bank statements, transaction records, even private communications. Every piece of paper told a story, and I was the one writing the ending. I kept my emotions locked away, because showing them would ruin the performance I was staging. Then came the hardest part, getting close to my sister. I knew she'd be the weakest link. I pretended I wanted to help her expand her business. I listened to her talk about her spending habits, her networking trips that were nothing more than luxury vacations, and her secret debt. She thought I was offering sisterly advice, but I was really collecting the final pieces of the puzzle. She never realized I was recording every word. She was digging her own grave, and I was holding the shovel. Once I had enough, I crafted my plan down to the smallest detail. I didn't want a messy confrontation. I wanted the law to strip them of everything they stole from me. I started by leaking selective information to the right authorities, anonymous tips that led them to investigate. At the same time, I prepared my formal legal claim, backed by evidence so airtight no amount of money or influence could save them. The beauty of it was that they wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late to fight back. Timing was everything. I waited for the day my parents were hosting a grand party to celebrate my sister's latest business milestone. They invited influential guests, journalists, and investors. I attended in a flawless dress, playing the perfect, supportive daughter. But in my clutch bag, I carried a flash drive, one that contained everything: fraudulent transactions, proof of misuse of the trust, and even recorded conversations implicating them. My heart pounded, but I didn't show a hint of it on my face. While my parents were busy impressing guests, I slipped the drive to one of the journalists, a man known for tearing apart corrupt elites. I whispered, "You're going to want to see this," and walked away without looking back. Within hours, the story broke online. My parents' faces were splashed across headlines, labeled as fraudsters and embezzlers. Guests began leaving the party in a rush, and I watched from a quiet corner as the proud, confident people who raised me started to crumble. But this was only the first strike. The legal papers were served the next morning. They didn't even have time to recover from the public humiliation before the lawsuits landed on their doorstep. My father raged, my mother cried, and my sister screamed about betrayal. None of them realized I had been planning this for months, maybe even years. From the moment they stole my future, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw accusations. I simply let the law speak for me. In court, the evidence spoke louder than any testimony. Their lawyers tried to twist the narrative, painting me as a bitter, jealous daughter, but the documents were undeniable. My sister had squandered hundreds of thousands on personal luxuries. My parents had used the inheritance to cover debts and buy properties in secret. Each revelation was a dagger in their credibility. The judge barely needed time to rule the trust would be returned to its rightful heir, me. The day the verdict came, I didn't celebrate loudly. I just walked out of the courthouse, head high, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. They had taken my money, my trust, my love, but I had taken everything back, with interest. Their reputation was ruined, their finances destroyed, and their relationships fractured. They thought they'd left me with nothing. They were wrong. I had my freedom, my fortune, and the satisfaction of knowing they never saw it coming. Revenge wasn't about screaming in their faces or making them beg. It was about watching them choke on their own arrogance. My parents and sister now lived in the shadow of their own greed, while I moved forward untouched. They taught me that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and I taught them that betrayal comes with a price. A price I made sure they paid in full. And as I closed that chapter of my life, I knew one thing: they would never recover from this. The night the break came, the air felt heavier than usual, pressing against my chest as if warning me of what was to come. I had played my role perfectly until now, quiet, compliant, almost invisible. But that night, I arrived at my parents' house with an envelope in hand, my heart a drumbeat of controlled rage. My sister's voice floated from the kitchen, dripping with laughter. The very same laughter that had mocked me the day they took my inheritance. I gripped the envelope tighter, knowing this was the first domino in a chain that would tear their comfort apart. They wouldn't see me as quiet anymore. I stepped inside, every creak of the floorboard a reminder of my childhood, of the girl who once thought this home was a sanctuary. My parents turned from the dining table, their eyes narrowing when they saw me. My father's mouth opened to speak, but I cut him off with a calm, calculated smile. "I just came to drop something off," I said softly. It wasn't a lie. What I carried wasn't money or a gift, it was information. Information sharp enough to slice through their carefully constructed lives like a blade through silk. My sister eyed me, suspicion flickering across her face, though she tried to mask it with arrogance. She'd grown comfortable in her stolen throne, wearing the role of the favored child like a crown. My mother urged me to sit, but I declined, my eyes never leaving hers. I placed the envelope on the table, sliding it toward my father. His hand hesitated before taking it, sensing something was wrong. I could feel the temperature in the room shift warmer, heavier, almost suffocating as he began to open it. My pulse was steady, my control absolute. Inside were photocopies of documents, bank transfers, shell companies, and proof of my parents' quiet laundering of what had once been my inheritance. But that was just the appetizer. Beneath the papers lay a single photograph, showing my father meeting with a man whose name carried weight in the criminal underworld. My sister leaned forward, her lips parting in confusion. My father's jaw tightened as his eyes darted from the photograph to me. I said nothing, letting silence chew at their nerves. It was the kind of silence that makes people confess even when you haven't accused them yet. My mother's voice finally broke the tension, sharp and defensive. "What is this?" she demanded, her eyes scanning the papers as if willing them to disappear. I kept my tone level. "It's a start," I replied. "There's more, much more, but I thought you'd like a preview." I could see the panic beginning to bloom behind her practiced composure. This was the moment I had been waiting for, not the explosion of guilt, but the quiet realization that I now held the power. I had become the threat they couldn't control. My father tried to regain control, leaning back in his chair with forced calm. "You think this scares us?" he asked. I didn't answer right away, just studied his face. The small twitch in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed against the wood, told me he was already calculating how to contain this. "It doesn't have to," I said finally. "It's only scary if you've got something to lose." My words lingered in the air, heavy and deliberate. My sister shifted uncomfortably, glancing between our parents like a child sensing the family walls crumbling. I leaned forward, my voice quieter but sharper. "You took what was mine. But I'm not here to ask for it back. I'm here to decide how much of your world I want to burn." My sister scoffed, but there was no conviction behind it. She was bluffing her courage. I caught her eyes, letting her see the certainty in mine. For years, they had underestimated me. Tonight, they'd realize that their mistake wasn't stealing from MIT, was assuming I'd stay silent. Silence is dangerous. It's the sound of something building. My father's gaze hardened, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. The fear in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He believed me. I could have ended it there, walked away with the upper hand, but this was only the break, not the end. I wanted them to feel the suspense, to live in dread of what I might do next. "Think about it," I said, rising from my chair. "Think about who you've made your enemy." The scrape of the chair legs on the floor sounded like the tearing of old bonds as I turned to leave. My mother called after me, her voice trembling just enough to betray her fear. "Alina, we can talk about this," she said, as if she hadn't chosen silence when they signed my future away. I didn't look back. Talking was for people who still cared about fixing what was broken. I was past that. My only language now was action, and they were about to learn it fluently. The door closed behind me with a click that sounded final, like the last page of a chapter being turned. Outside, the cold night air bit at my skin. But it felt clean compared to the suffocating heat of their dining room. I walked to my car slowly, savoring the feeling of control flooding through me. This wasn't revenge yet, this was just leverage. I wanted them to spend sleepless nights wondering when the real blow would come. The plan was already in motion, but patience was my ally. The best revenge doesn't strike fast, it seeps in, like poison, until it consumes everything. Driving away, I pictured their faces. My sister's arrogance cracking, my mother's mask slipping, my father's cold authority shattering under the weight of panic. I imagined them sifting through the papers, trying to guess how deep my reach went, how much I knew. The truth was, I knew everything. And soon, so would the people who mattered most to them. Reputation, wealth, security, it was all just fragile glass. I had the rock in my hand. I parked my car on a quiet street, turned off the engine, and sat in the darkness. The city hummed faintly in the distance, oblivious to the war I had just declared. My hands were steady, my breathing calm. I didn't need to rush. Every great downfall begins with a fracture, and I had just split their foundation wide open. All I had to do now was wait for gravity to do the rest. And when it did, they'd remember this night as the moment everything started to break. This wasn't just payback, it was a reclamation. My inheritance wasn't just money. It was dignity, justice, the proof that I had mattered once in their eyes. They had tried to erase me, but in trying, they had written me into the story as the villain they deserved. And the thing about villains, we never fight fair. I had no intention of giving them a clean ending. I remember the exact moment the tables turned. The fear in my parents' eyes when they realized the court had frozen every asset they tried to hide. My sister sat pale and trembling beside them, her hands gripping her designer bag as if it could shield her from what was coming. The evidence I had gathered was airtight, forged signatures, falsified documents, and hidden offshore accounts. Everything they thought I would never find was now neatly laid before the judge. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was enough, and watching it unfold was its own justice. My lawyer, calm and sharp as a blade, laid out the timeline of betrayal in a voice that cut through the courtroom like glass. Every letter, every bank transfer, every whisper of their deceit was displayed on the giant screen behind us. My parents looked smaller than I'd ever seen them, no longer the towering figures who once dictated my life. My sister avoided my eyes, her arrogance drained. This wasn't about revenge alone. This was about dismantling the lie they had built, brick by brick, until nothing remained. When the verdict came, it was almost anticlimactic. The inheritance was restored entirely to me, along with damages that would bankrupt them for years. My parents' empire, once built on appearances and manipulation, crumbled in the space of a few sentences. My sister would lose her lavish home, her cars, and the lifestyle she had mocked me for not having. The silence that followed was deafening, yet it was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. They couldn't speak because there was nothing left for them to say. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed and reporters swarmed. I didn't stop for them. This wasn't their story to twist into headlines. It was mine, and I was done letting anyone else narrate it. I walked past the chaos, the weight of years of betrayal finally lifting off my chest. The wind was cold, but it felt clean, as if it was stripping away the last traces of the poison my family had left in me. I wasn't walking away from them, was walking toward the life they swore I'd never have. The fallout was swift and brutal. My parents were publicly shamed, their friends and business associates vanishing overnight. My sister, who had flaunted her stolen fortune on social media, became the subject of endless online ridicule. The same people who had praised them for their perfect family now turned on them like vultures. I didn't watch with pity. They had written this ending for themselves. I was simply the one who delivered it, and for the first time, I felt no guilt for refusing to save them. I invested the restored inheritance wisely, not in revenge, but in freedom. I bought a home in a quiet coastal town where no one knew my last name. I started a foundation to help people fight financial exploitation by their own families, giving others the weapon I wished I'd had earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. My parents had tried to erase me for money, But in the end, that same money became the reason I could erase them from my life entirely. That was the sweetest victory of all. Occasionally, I would hear rumors, my father picking up odd consulting work just to pay rent, my mother selling off her jewelry to cover legal fees, my sister bouncing from one friend's couch to another, no longer welcome in the circles she once ruled. They lived in the shadow of what they had done, while I stood in the sunlight they thought they could take from me. I never reached out, not even to gloat. Silence, I found, was the most devastating revenge of all. I kept every piece of evidence from the trial in a locked box. Not because I feared they'd come after me again, but because it reminded me of a truth I'd once been too naive to see. Family is not defined by blood, but by loyalty. That box was my shield, my proof that no matter how close someone is, you can't let them stand between you and your dignity. I had learned that the hard way, but I had learned it completely, and I would never unlearn it. The nights grew quieter, the air lighter. I no longer woke from dreams of my parents' betrayal with my heart pounding. Instead, I dreamed of things I had once been too afraid to imagine, building something entirely mine, untouched by greed or manipulation. I traveled, laughed freely, and allowed myself to trust new people, though carefully. My past had carved deep scars, but scars are proof that you've healed. And mine were a testament to a war I had won. There were moments rare and fleeting when I wondered if they regretted it all. But then I remembered their faces in the courtroom. Not sorry, just afraid of losing. And that told me everything I needed to know. Regret had never been part of their nature, only entitlement. That's why I never looked back. Some people are best left in the ruins they built themselves. On the anniversary of the verdict, I stood at the edge of the ocean, outside my home. The horizon stretched endlessly before me, the waves pulling away everything that no longer belonged. I whispered a silent goodbye, not to them, but to the version of me that once thought they could never hurt me. That girl was gone, replaced by someone stronger, sharper, unshakable. I didn't just get my inheritance back. I got my life back. And in the end, that was worth far more than $10 million. I had turned their betrayal into my liberation, their cruelty into my power. And though they never saw it coming, I had always known this was the only ending that would ever truly set me free. And so I walked away, leaving their shadows behind. My story wasn't about what they took, it was about what I refused to let them keep. The future stretched wide and untouched before me. This time, it belonged to me alone. And that was the kind of wealth no one could ever steal again.